Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Migrate to AWS in 30 Days with Logicworks. My name is Sai Reddy. I'm a Solutions Architect with AWS. We also have Joseph Rahim Jadeh, Senior Solutions Specialist from Logicworks, who will be presenting with me today. With that said, let's get started. In the first 10 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about AWS, what sets us apart, what are customers doing with AWS, what are some of the challenges they are facing when it comes to migrating to AWS, and how we can help overcome these challenges. After that, I'll hand over to Joe from Logicworks. So let's start with what sets AWS apart. Customers have selected AWS for years because we have proven ourselves committed to customer success. We believe we stand apart in the market because of 6 factors: experience, service breadth and depth, pace of innovation, global footprint, pricing philosophy, and partner ecosystem. Let me elaborate on each of these a little bit. The first key differentiator is our experience. We have spent over a decade building the world's most reliable, secure, scalable, and cost-effective infrastructure. There is no substitute for the experience of time, and no cloud provider has been in operation longer than AWS. Our second key differentiator is our service breadth and depth and our pace of innovation. We have developed the broadest collection of services available from any cloud provider. We have been continually expanding our services to support virtually any cloud workload, and we now have more than 90 services that range from compute, storage, networking, databases, analytics, application services, deployment, management, mobile, IoT, AI, security, hybrid, and enterprise applications. We launched more than 1,000 new features and services last year. So our third key differentiators are our global footprint, our pricing philosophy, and our ecosystem. To support our global customer base, we operate around 16 regions and 42 availability zones across the globe. When it comes to our pricing philosophy, our massive scale provides huge economies of scale, which lowers our costs considerably. We are also committed to increasing utilization and streamlining operations. The combined savings of these factors allow us to proactively and regularly decrease customer costs. Since 2006, we have reduced our prices more than 50 times. AWS has the largest ecosystem in the cloud so far, and it continues to grow at a rapid clip. It's very likely that SI and ISV partners of choice for a lot of customers are already partners of AWS. So I just talked about what sets us apart, but let me talk about from a customer's point of view. Why are they choosing AWS and what are they actually achieving with AWS? I have a couple of customer stories to highlight. Let me start with Netflix. Netflix runs everything out of AWS. They have around 90+ million users in more than 190 countries. Using our global regions and availability zones, they're able to quickly scale and service their user base without having to purchase expensive hardware or having to manage data centers. Capital One is another customer. Capital One is one of the nation's largest banks and is using AWS as a central part of its technology strategy. Capital One selected AWS for its security model, as they believe that they can be more secure on AWS than in any private data center. GE Island Gas is migrating 500 applications to the cloud as part of a major digital transformation, helping it attain a 52% reduction in TCO. These cost savings are in addition to other benefits such as greater speed to market and more agility to compete even better in an industry experiencing immense market challenges. Expedia Inc. is another customer. Expedia is a leading online travel company. Expedia's engineering team realized that they had to run one of their key applications in locations physically close to customers to enable a quick and responsive service with minimal network latency. Expedia launched this application initially in the Asia-Pac region and then quickly replicated the service in the US and the EU regions. According to Expedia, latency was one of their biggest issues. Using AWS multi-region approach, they were able to decrease average network latency from 700 milliseconds to less than 50 milliseconds. So these are some of the things that our customers are achieving using our AWS platform. A lot of enterprise companies understand the benefits of cloud. They want to focus more on their business and innovate like a startup. However, they have some real questions that they want help with when it comes to migrating to cloud. Questions such as, what do we do with our existing investments? How do we get on board some of our skeptical stakeholders? Will there be downtime during migration? How do we manage application dependencies during migration? What about the skills and expertise that we need to migrate our applications to cloud? For the last couple of years, we've been working really hard to help our customers overcome these barriers. We have developed a large and growing ecosystem of partners that have the experience and skills needed to execute migrations. This is where our vetted partners, such as Logicworks, can help. They have the experience and skills needed to execute migrations to AWS. We have also, in the last couple of years, built a robust set of services to help our customers with these migrations. Our application discovery service helps customers quickly and reliably plan application migration projects by automatically identifying applications running in on-premise data centers, their associated dependencies, and their performance profile. AWS Server Migration Service is an agentless service that allows you to automate, schedule, and track incremental replications of live server volumes, making it easier for you to coordinate large-scale server migrations. AWS Database Migration Service helps you migrate databases to AWS easily and securely. The source database remains fully operational during the migration, minimizing downtime. AWS Migration Service supports both homogeneous migrations, such as Oracle to Oracle, as well as heterogeneous migrations between different database platforms, such as Oracle to Amazon Aurora or Microsoft SQL Server to MySQL. We also have a set of tools to help customers transfer data to AWS. Snowball is a petabyte-scale data transport solution that uses secure appliances to transfer large amounts of data into and out of AWS. Using Snowball addresses common challenges with large-scale data transfers, including high network costs, long transfer times, and security concerns. AWS Snowmobile is an exabyte-scale data transfer service used to move extremely large amounts of data to AWS. You can transfer up to 100 petabytes per Snowmobile, a 45-foot long ruggedized shipping container pulled by a semi-trailer truck. Snowmobile makes it easy to move massive volumes of data to the cloud, including video libraries, image repositories, or even a complete data center migration. So you've seen how our customers are, some of the questions that our customers have when it comes to migrating to AWS, and what we have done, whether it's when it comes to creating a migration methodology or creating a vast ecosystem of partners that can help with the migrations, or even a good set of services that can help with these migrations. So with that said, I would like to hand over to Joe from Logicworks. As you will find through the remainder of this webinar, the AWS partner ecosystem is a great place to find highly experienced organizations who can support you through these major changes in your cloud journey. I would like to introduce Logicworks, one of our premier consulting partners, who has specific experience and competency around migrations and AWS more broadly. Representing Logicworks is Joseph Rahimzadeh, a senior solution specialist who will walk you through the common challenges and solutions during a migration with a customer example to tie it all together. Thank you for being here, Joe.
Thanks for the introduction, Sai. And you're absolutely right. AWS has done a great job of building a partner network to provide really end-to-end solutions for a rapidly growing user base. To everyone listening, thank you for joining. We're very happy to have you here. As Sai said, my name is Joe Rahimzadeh. I'm a senior solutions specialist with Logicworks. I'm also a certified AWS solutions architect, and I really spent the last 4 years with Logicworks helping to guide my customers through the process of effectively migrating and operating their AWS systems. So today, I'd like to share with you a story about one of my own customers, PartyLite Worldwide. It's a particularly interesting and not entirely uncommon use case. They're a mid-sized retail company operating on a global scale, and we recently got them to AWS in less than 30 days. So after this webinar, we hope that you walk away with a better understanding of really the tools, the services, and the processes that you need to replicate their success and ultimately transform your business by using AWS. Excuse me, scrolling too much there. So to begin, it's important to recap what Sai discussed, specifically that AWS is incredibly powerful and robust. It's a very attractive platform for IT organizations, from startups all the way to enterprises, and for many of the same reasons. Whether you're scaling to levels that would have otherwise been impossible, improving security and uptime by leveraging multiple availability zones and regions, or cutting costs by paying for only what you use, Amazon has really provided solutions to the problems faced by IT for decades. So this sounds great, but we all know the realities of working in IT. Something like you have an urgent project that can't afford a 6-month strategic planning process. You have a limited budget. Your team may be thin on AWS experience. And in the rush to get things done, your team might even get critical things wrong. On top of this, your application may not be cloud ready, and you don't necessarily have the budget or time to re-architect. So over the next 25 minutes, we're going to discuss how to successfully migrate to AWS even when, and I should say especially when, the conditions are far from perfect. So we'll use PartyLite as an example. Again, they're a global retail company, and we'll show step by step how they migrated to AWS in just 30 days with the help of Logicworks. Over the course of this case study, we'll show you how to balance re-architecting your applications, which is really valuable but takes a lot of time and planning. How to balance that with a lift and shift, which is less ideal but certainly takes less time. And finally, whether it's reducing risk, accelerating timelines, implementing compliance, monitoring, or you name it, there's usually a partner out there who's done it before. And so we'll talk about the specific areas where it makes sense to bring a partner in to supplement your in-house team. So the customer case study, again, is PartyLite. And they are the #1 party plan company in the world, particularly popular in the European markets. As a retail company, they do roughly $400 million a year in sales. And they had a mix of legacy VMware and SaaS, more traditionally trained IT team. They'd been interested in AWS for quite some time because they felt that it would suit their business needs really well, highly elastic, pay-as-you-go, and so on. They hadn't quite made the leap to get their North American ordering platform on AWS just yet, until, of course, a crisis happened. So the data center provider, So the data center provider that was hosting some of their e-commerce applications suddenly and without warning notified PartyLite that they would be ceasing operations in 60 days. So for PartyLite, they really only had 30 days to come up with a new plan, a plan that would support a multi-million-dollar ordering platform without issue. I think we can all agree that that's no small feat. Taking a quick step back, just to look at this through the lens of the larger group here, this really probably sounds like a nightmare scenario to many of you folks listening today. Even though these seem like unusual circumstances, many of our customers have faced tight deadlines for a wide variety of reasons. Whether it's product launch deadlines, board approvals, internal resources leaving the company, and of course by association the project. So this deadline isn't actually as uncommon as you might think. So the point is, almost every migration has to deal with imperfect conditions. Again, whether it's a deadline or lack of resources or what have you. So here's an oversimplification of the 4 main areas of PartyLite strategy for dealing with these conditions. One, find a partner who's done it before. Two, clearly define the project and personnel. Three, dedicate resources to the project. And four, look toward the future. So let's take a second to unpack those. First, the most effective and efficient way to accelerate this whole process is to find a partner that's done it before. That partner can look back on lots of successful engagements as a reference point for how to actually solve your specific problems. The unknown challenges that you might face probably have been encountered and dealt with by a company who's done this over the course of hundreds of projects across a wide range of industries. And so they can help you clearly define roles, responsibilities, milestones, timelines, the whole plan, and they really get that project from an idea to a plan. So without doing all of that, you're going to have too many disparate groups trying to achieve really the same results using varying methods. One key here is that uniformity and standardization are extremely important. So from there, both you and your partner need to dedicate resources to the specific project with a common goal in mind. Finally, since today, the way we're building this now does not have the perfect conditions, you need to build an infrastructure that's flexible enough to actually evolve and mature into the desired end state as you move forward. So PartyLite, in their case, obviously prioritized meeting the deadline over extensive strategic planning, re-architecting, optimization discussions, right? So having been in this situation before, Logicworks really designed the environment with an eye towards the future, looking at growth and optimization and supportability. It's really important for companies that don't have a lot of time to actually plan and test now, but they want to lay the groundwork for future changes. So here at Logicworks, we've actually built our business around working really closely with our customers, acting in a trusted advisor capacity more than anything, through the many phases of migration and actually on through to operations. So one thing our customers would say is that we provide them with a newfound eyesight, right? An eyesight to help them see problems and solutions where they may not have even known to look. And so we do this with our end-to-end cloud services solution, focusing really on four main things. One, designing. Two, building. Three, automating. And four, providing ongoing management for critical, secure AWS cloud infrastructure. We've been doing this for more than 20 years. We're actually an AWS Premier Partner. We're an audited managed services provider, and we hold competencies in migration, commerce, healthcare, and also DevOps, just to name a few. So really, our focus is on 100% customized infrastructure for our clients. And because of that, we have a lot of experience across a wide range of business verticals and needs. Our largest footprint is actually in the security and compliance domain, and so we specialize in HIPAA and NIST standards, PCI, SSA 16, and SOC 2. We also really try and take a very practical approach to using the right combination of AWS native tools, automation, and our own processes to guide our customers through a successful migration so they can get the most out of AWS, and we'll talk a bit about that today. But I think it's important first to look through the anatomy of migration to AWS. So as I discussed, there really are 5 key stages in the migration process. Let's walk through each one of these step by step. We'll start with opportunity evaluation, of course. So in a standard migration, PartyLite and Logicworks would have done a lot of things. We would have conducted a total cost of ownership analysis to really gauge the costs on AWS versus on-premise or versus a hosted solution. We would have done a gap analysis that tells us how far away the current systems are from the best practices, as well as how do we close that gap. And then we would have also done extensive planning for migration, which would have taken place over the course of multiple weeks or even months. If you have the time, these activities, they'll certainly set you on the path toward a successful outcome. I don't think it's any secret that the more you know and the more you plan, the better the process goes. But unfortunately, with this particular project, we didn't have the luxury of really dedicating the amount of time and resources on each step that we'd like to have. So, of course, some risks had to be taken to ultimately achieve the best case scenario, which here was getting to AWS in 30 days with no downtime, no loss in security, no loss in compliance. In practical reality, this was really done, the evaluation phase really consisted of a few detailed phone conversations with Logicworks' senior architects and engineers and PartyLite's lead technologists. So in PartyLite's case, one of the immediate benefits they realized from working with Logicworks is they had access to a pre-existing set of tools and really experience to help reduce all of the risks of a quick and dirty migration. If they'd gone at this alone, there may have been more questions than answers, and obviously not an ideal scenario. So the next phase is discovery and education, and that usually consists of 4 main elements. Right? So the first is to inventory your current systems. In PartyLite's case, this actually was a VMware-based environment, and it was relatively straightforward. So PartyLite's engineers could just create an inventory of the systems and hand that list to Logicworks. Of course, the teams had to get together and provide some context to those spreadsheets, but from there we could determine the appropriate servers and VM roles. But if we were to do this today, we would absolutely use AWS's application discovery service. It was just released in 2016, and it was something that Sai mentioned a moment ago. It's really easy to use. It allows you to automatically identify apps running in on-prem environments. You can get details like configuration and usage data, and it provides details on how those various services are dependent on one another. You don't have to install an agent or a host, and so for us, really, it's a no-brainer when migrating from VMware. We wish it existed when we did this in the first place. So first, we took an inventory of the current systems. Next, we had to do a mapping exercise to place the current systems and see how they translate to AWS components and services. So Amazon has over 70 services. Again, a highly robust platform, and knowing which to use really requires a certain level of expertise and knowledge, both on the platform side, but also the application. So in this portion, it was a highly collaborative process between Logicworks, our team educating PartyLite about which services we found to be the best for their use case, and PartyLite telling us, you know, the functionality of the application, the flow of it, the quirks. These are all things that you really need to know in order to have a successful migration. So today there's actually software products that can do some of this, but we still think it's really important to subject that server data to human intelligence, especially when you're looking at things like EC2 instance sizing. So after all that, we have to set timelines and responsibilities. Usually, this is depicted in a detailed RACI chart and or a project implementation doc. If you're going to do this on your own, even just completing an Excel spreadsheet of tasks and responsibilities, that is vital. It should really constitute the bare minimum for getting started. We've done this many times, and so we have a detailed framework that allows us to get started much more quickly than if we were starting from scratch. But again, that is certainly just the bare minimum. And so along the way, we're using this planning time to help PartyLite's team get more familiar with AWS. So there's a few fundamental education concepts that come up in nearly all migrations. So we'll go through those pretty briefly here. So one concept that lots of new AWS customers struggle with, but really need to grasp, is understanding AWS's shared responsibility model. So in a customer scenario where a partner is not leveraged, right, the shared responsibility model will tell you that AWS covers the physical infrastructure and data center, and you're responsible for everything else. So this is the security of the cloud, which is actually Amazon's responsibility, versus security in the cloud, which is you. So lots of customers actually come to AWS thinking that Amazon manages the cloud for you. And while they do an excellent job of providing a very robust platform, you should really expect them to provide the tools to manage your cloud rather than manage it themselves, right? So here is an oversimplification. Working with AWS means you're not racking and stacking servers, but you still have to configure your systems, maintain them, enforce security, control costs, just as if you were renting servers in a data center, right? So again, the benefit of working with a partner that actually sticks past the migration with you, when you use a management partner, responsibility for the components you see here in light blue, that's actually shared with the partner. So a lot less ongoing management for your team and reduced security and operational risks. So it's quite important. Another question that we get all the time is, can you meet regulatory compliance obligations in AWS? It's a question that PartyLite had and was absolutely necessary to answer. It's important to take a step back and note that at Logicworks, we actually view security and compliance as two different things. So for us, compliance is really more about checking a box that ultimately gets you through an audit, right? Security is really about how well you're protecting your systems and your data. And so whenever possible, our design, build, and management of Amazon infrastructure aims to go beyond that compliance and into the realm of really highly secure. So bringing it back to compliance in the cloud, it's a pretty complex subject. I certainly recommend looking at Amazon's documentation, but for simplicity's sake, we can think of it like the shared security model. So for certain compliance standards, AWS can attest to the security of the physical hardware and the data centers, but you actually still need to go out and get your own attestation of compliance. So that's going to cover things like your own offices, your application, your people, your security policies. With PartyLite, they had strict PCI regulations to follow, and so security of the cloud was covered by AWS, but security in the cloud was a pretty large task that had to be tackled. And so it made sense for PartyLite to partner with Logicworks, who could remove a lot of that infrastructure-related compliance burden for them, especially since our experience in the compliance domain actually goes back 20 years. So we go through our own audits on an annual basis. We actually hand those off to our customers during their audit, and we satisfy a great deal of the infrastructure-related compliance. So basically, if we're going to sum this up, it's for PartyLite, each attestation on compliance, their own, ours, and Amazon's, were actually layered on top of one another to cover all bases for a fully compliant solution. So the next phase is design, and really you have two options here. One is a lift and shift, and two is re-architect, is speaking in broad terms here. So to lift and shift, you're essentially replicating server for server and resource for resource the current environment into Amazon. Takes very little modification to the app, so it's less costly, but you're probably not getting a lot of the cloud native features that AWS offers, and so your application may not perform as well as it should, or you may be running at higher costs than you'd like. It's a method that we actually try and avoid wherever possible, but it's not always possible. The second option is to re-architect, which requires spending time up front and or hiring a partner to apply AWS design best practices. So that's designing for things like constant change, architecting for failure, so on and so forth. So these are things that Logicworks really specializes in, and actually we look back on hundreds of successful projects with our customers to help future customers get through these uncertain times. It's really actually worth noting that these are not just technology shifts, right? They require a shift in the mindset of your entire team. If you approach Amazon the way you approach traditional IT systems, you're going to lose a lot of the benefits that Amazon has to offer. Namely, you're going to lose agility, you're going to lose cost, but certainly across other areas. So in short, it's actually really difficult to implement any of these principles in 30 days without a partner, right? But no matter what, it's always good to have these principles in mind so that you can optimize in the future. So with that shift in mindset, you can think of it going from mode 1, which is really traditional IT, to mode 2, which is much more agile. In PartyLite's traditional environment, where we came from, the resources, they were largely static. They didn't change too often, and when changes were needed, excuse me, I think I jumped to the wrong slide there. So they didn't change very often, and when changes were needed, there was a lot of risk, right? And it was draining man hours. In the AWS environment that we wanted to design for them, we wanted to build these systems around the principles of infrastructure as code. In other words, really, the system would be built and tested and updated just like a piece of software. What we wanted to do was be able to make changes easily, and if we had to, we could roll back on those changes. This keeps moving forward. So rather than manually building what we call snowflake servers, where every resource has a different configuration, we build a limited number of templates that can actually be used over and over again. So here we're treating our servers like cattle, not like pets. This is actually a topic that Werner Vogels touched on during his reInvent keynote address. This is a crucial step because it means that all the configurations of the system are actually documented in a single place, which is important for compliance and, of course, for PartyLite. And then, rather than keeping track of changes in an Excel spreadsheet, we know that the configuration of every server at every minute is what we want it to be because we've put configuration management tools in place. And so, lastly, automation is about building what we call guardrails. In other words, you want to create tooling and processes and scripts that can prevent an error. There's lots of ways to accomplish this, but one example is to create CloudFormation templates that actually have security built into the configurations. This way, developers actually can't make errors. Auditors love to see those templates, by the way. There we go. So for the more technical folks among us, this is what those actual layers of automation look like. So starting at the base of the diagram, Amazon obviously provides the raw resources. We then build out those foundational resources using CloudFormation. We use that to establish network, tell AWS which size instance we want, put those into defined auto-scaling groups, and set up specific scaling rules, and a lot more on top of that. Then Logicworks will actually configure the OS with configuration management. So the value of using some configuration management tool, like for example Puppet, is that when you want to change the OS, you can change the actual code on the servers without making major changes to the servers themselves. This means that we can actually roll out changes to many instances at once, and then if we need to roll back, we can do that. So when you're done making those changes, every instance is in a known and ideal state. So then we deploy the latest version of code to that fully configured instance with the deployment automation tool. So we at Logicworks strongly prefer AWS's Code Deploy. It's a really excellent, very flexible tool for a wide range of use cases. We also pretty frequently use Amazon's ECS, the Elastic Container Service. We use that to deploy Docker containers. And so, of course, the client, in this case PartyLite, is responsible for the application code itself. So if you're just starting on AWS, you don't have to do all of this at once. You really should look at this as a guide to getting to a fully automated scenario. In our experience, it's really helpful if you can at least start with CloudFormation. Actually, AWS has pre-built CloudFormation templates, even ones that are PCI compliant already right there online. So it's definitely worth exploring. So this has been a rough technical overview of AWS automation. If this is something that you and your team are looking at seriously, please check out other Logicworks resources or Amazon's website. There's plenty of there to parse through. So as we've been discussing there really are some serious benefits to automation. In implementing these tools up front, yes, it may take some time, but it will make the whole process much easier for later applications to be migrated. Those apps can just use or modify the templates you've already built. So you can actually accelerate cloud adoption in the long run by taking some time up front to do it right. It allows you to focus staff on revenue generating activities, not necessarily on manual updates and lengthy rebuilds. The infrastructure automation we described is also key to resiliency because it allows you to trivially spin up or bring down resources to replace failed ones. PartyLite has actually achieved 100% uptime since launching on AWS, which is a significant increase over their on-premise uptime rates. And then human error being reduced and the time to recover being reduced. Manual work, and this really cannot be overstated, introduces tremendous risk to the enterprise, especially at scale. Human memory is limited, and manual work is extremely time-consuming. So those two things combined really make it really make the case for automating. So while we'd love to show you an architectural diagram of exactly what we built for PartyLite and how the various tiers communicate with one another, of course we can't. So here are some of the services we initially deployed. They're fairly basic. They're ones that we could count on working with PartyLite's application in support of a lift and shift. I should note that PartyLite's infrastructure has actually matured and changed quite a bit, but this gives a good indication that you can build a pretty robust environment with just a few basic services. We're happy to walk through any of these in more detail, and feel free to look these up on Amazon's website as well. So in the last 8 or so minutes, we will walk through what is arguably the most important stage in the actual migration to AWS. So in PartyLite's case, in VMware, what you need to do is take your machine image, and for the most part, you could just spin these up as AMIs on Amazon. We also had to do some custom AMIs for PartyLite, but that's quite common. The good news is creating these is not a huge effort, and if you have the expertise, it can be done in just a few days. From there, we do the environment build out. At this point, we had already built out AWS CloudFormation templates, so we only had to do some minor tweaking. Spinning up the environment for us was really just like a one-line command. Those instances then got configured by Puppet, and they were actually ready to receive code at that point. That took us 1 or 2 days. If you don't use these tools, you'll actually have to manually build out these environments, either through the AWS console or through the API. That could take a week or more depending on your people. It really just depends. Next is instance fine-tuning. So the question here is actually, how is the application performing in testing? So one challenge is actually, once you've built the instance, you can change the size, but you can't change the type. Since our infrastructure is built in CloudFormation, if we want to change the instance size or type, we can just destroy the entire environment and build a new one in minutes. Remember, cattle, not pets. The next part is getting the data there. So we did this over the internet. You can imagine that it took some time. If we could do it today, Sai brought up Amazon Snowball. It's a physical device that you hook into your data center. You can transfer data really easily and securely, and in some cases at a fraction of the cost of high-speed internet. and then that's shipped back to AWS via UPS. Next is a third-party tool installation. So PartyLite is PCI compliant. We had to install a few tools. I'll just name a few here. AlertLogic's IDS, called Threat Manager, and their Log Manager solution, really great security and compliance tools. Duo for smartphone-based dual-factor authentication, and so on. And finally, a step that actually happens throughout the whole process is testing, right? We aim to integrate both infrastructure and code-level tests during this phase. So on the infrastructure side, we use things like Netflix's Simian Army to test for infrastructure resiliency across multiple tiers of the app. And really, the final stage of a migration is actually ongoing operations, right? So this is an area that usually comes up as an afterthought or in the 11th hour, but should absolutely be part of the planning discussion, since the systems that you're building actually have to be supportable over the long term. So for PartyLite, we're providing a number of things. I'll touch on just a few. 24/7 support through our Network Operations Center engineering team, right? So they're responding to alerts and alarms, fixing issues as they arrive. Security and incident management. This ultimately helps PartyLite get through an audit more effectively. We're doing database management, including installation, backups, performance tuning of the OS, and database parameters, all of those sorts of things. Really, the key here is that we have a long track record of proven AWS expertise, and we work with some very sensitive and critical applications. So it's taken us running workloads on Amazon for about 5 years to learn what we didn't know and what we couldn't possibly have known going in. After the first step of building and migrating, right, once that's complete, you need to continue to refine and maintain these systems. So from the commercial side, you need to do a few things. Legally, you have to understand how to translate what you've done here to your compliance auditors. Financially, you have to manage and report on costs. You have to keep those costs down. We use a lot of strategies like spot instances and reserved instances. And from an R&D perspective, you have to actually maintain this system in a world of constant innovation, right? So these are all challenges that you face, and a partner like Logicworks can help you through. So PartyLite chose to figure this all out in concert with Logicworks, where we help them get started on their journey in a very de-risked sort of way with a faster time to deploy. And we stuck by them well beyond the migration, now going on 2.5 years. So the benefits of AWS, while PartyLite didn't have these initially, they have largely been optimized to realize these today. They have a better shopping experience through a highly elastic and automated scalable environment. They have reduced risk of cardholder data being lost. That infrastructure is built with hardened instances and Logicworks security best practices for access control, data protection, and so on. They have no loss of sales due to downtime. The business is very cyclical and has lots of spikes, and so we've designed a system to be highly available for them. And from cost savings, we've used a number of strategies like reserved instance for the base architecture and on-demand instances for anything that needs scaling thereafter. So working with Logicworks, we have truncated the time spent on the project, helping PartyLite get from 0 to 100 miles per hour faster than they could on their own. Provide 24/7 support. Rather than building that out internally, we provide that to them as a trusted partner. We're providing R&D services to make sure that new features and updates are correctly applied to their environments. And we are making it so that they don't have to go out and search for already hard to find AWS talent. We provide this service with a shorter ramp-up time, no danger of Logicworks leaving to take a job elsewhere, really acting like an insurance policy for your application environments. And so I will close with saying that it's really important for you to understand where you are in the process today. You should make sure that you have support from management, from your various teams. You should educate your staff on what the cloud is and what it does and why Amazon is different. Encourage experimentation internally, and finally engage partners. If you do all of this, you're putting yourself in a great position to really have an impact on the future of your business. Again, my name is Joe Rahimzadeh. I thank you all for your time and attendance. Contact information is here. I would love to hear about your transformation. With that, I'll turn it back to our moderator, Sai, for Q&A. Thank you.
Actually, Joe, I'm going to sort of take the lead on the Q&A section. This is Phil Christensen from Logicworks. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect. And just because we have a bunch of questions and I want to make sure we touch on them, I'm just going to be rephrasing some of these questions a little bit for clarity. So just to get started, we had one of our first questions was from Kabir. He was asking about the PartyLite migration in general. It was definitely very much a brownfield sort of approach. Like we had an existing architecture that had to be implemented, but then it kind of depends on how you look at brownfield versus greenfield. We definitely had a new AWS account that we're deploying these things in, but we definitely were trying to stick to all of the existing architectural decisions as much as possible. A follow-up question on that was whether we were using any sort of third-party platform to do migration across, using some of the pre-existing tools like CloudEndure and RaceMe. And basically, so far with PartyLite, we were largely just using a somewhat manual process of standing up an instance and then migrating the software sort of on a piece-by-piece basis. This was because some of those tools weren't quite as sophisticated at that time. These days, we would probably do a build like this leveraging the AWS Server Migration Service quite heavily, but the advantage that something like CloudEndure might have is CloudEndure has some options for doing long-term migration, like for longer than 90 days, whereas AWS will only allow you to do the server migration for about 90 days right now. There's also a follow-up question from Blake asking about when the server migration service will be available in more regions. Unfortunately, right now, that's not anything that we have on the roadmap, unless Sai, if you're available and you have more information on this.
Yeah, sure, Phil. Yeah. Right now, the service is currently available in US East, Asia Pac, and EU in Ireland. I don't have a definitive timeline to share with, but I can tell you that our service team is working really hard to support this service in our other regions as well.
Great. And so, following up on that, there was a question from Scott about other migration automation tools that we had used. And, basically our process for either building new infrastructure or converting existing infrastructure is based around a very modular set of CloudFormation templates where we can sort of tweak and tune the things that we're selecting to deploy the architecture that we want. And then we do find that, about 90% of the time, there's not a lot of variation on certain kinds of infrastructure we're going to set up. Standing up an EC2 instance follows largely the same process no matter what kind of instance it is. And by the way, we're going to try to answer as many questions as we get to right up until about 2 o'clock. And anybody we don't get to, we'll be emailing out additional answers to these questions along with a copy of the presentation that we gave today. Patrick Sullivan had asked a question about what we use for documenting and automating the compliance attestations. And this is really something that is key to our compliance process with clients. This is definitely a shared compliance responsibility. So there's a set of items that are handled by AWS. So we have extensive documentation from the AWS audits to supply the items that they're covered and how they cover them. Similarly, Logicworks goes through an extensive audit process, and so we have that same kind of information about our standard processes for dealing with the compliance items that are under our purview. And then as part of our engagement with a client, we would provide to them as part of a RaceMe diagram, would be illustrating exactly which items they are responsible for. So this is largely just something that we provide via Word documents that have been vetted and edited throughout the process. I have a couple of questions from Rick Koo about how we provide firewall coverage and whether this is using stateful packet inspection. One of the things that's core to the AWS security model is the use of security groups, which take care of the stateful packet inspection level. These understand the concepts of pre-existing connections and are able to handle established connections properly. But then there's also a stateless firewall that's involved that's called the network ACL. And we do use that to do a sort of a very broad stroke kind of security model before any packets actually get into the environment. The network ACL is also used to segregate connectivity between different subnets. We had a question from Eric Newsom about he's a current customer and he's looking at moving more workloads to AWS, but had some concerns about how to vet new features that come out of AWS. His organization is fairly risk averse and they just want to make sure that things go through a proper testing process before they reach us. And I mean, at that point, I would say that we follow kind of the same process that many of our clients would in this situation, is that we have a sandbox account where we try things out. We're pretty vigorous about installing the, trying to use all the best practices and ensuring that we use any of the new services that are coming down from AWS, because many of the times it provides things, it's a lot more of a simple process for us and it's easier to fill goals for particular clients based on new managed services. So I would say that, first of all, we found that by the time things are released for general access in AWS, I have very few problems with showstopper bugs. Sometimes the initial release of certain services isn't as fully featured as they ultimately will be. So I would say that more than anything else, it would be the careful approach to continual upgrades that sort of stands in the way of immediately using a new service rather than any particular bugs. So I would still advocate that people use a sandbox and try out services first if they have the option. But of course, Logicworks is doing that constantly, so that's also a great reason to have an MSP like us involved. I had a question about AWS Snowball. There is an extra cost for using this. Snowball can handle between 50 and 80 terabytes per device. And so the current sort of billing process for that is it's $200 per workload, and you basically get that that device you have access to for a week. And if you have it longer than that, AWS will have a per day service charge. This is all fairly well documented on the AWS pricing pages. So if you have more questions, that's something that usually is fairly easy to get a page on AWS via Google. We'll also include more details on that when we send it out. Everybody's really got some great questions here, so I have a whole bunch of new ones. I'm just going to take a quick second to sort of browse through these and just talk about some of these things. But as I said, anything that we can't handle before the top of the hour, by the way, that's 2 p.m. EST, I guess that's going to be 11 a.m. PST for those on the left coast. We're just going to keep going through these, though. So as far as, let's see here. Sorry. So as part of, there's a question from Alexander Coombs who was asking, we mentioned that we produce an inventory of systems during discovery. Right now, there's a lot of options with regards to the server migration service to automatically detect the inventory of systems. But because we were working with PartyLite and they had a VMware infrastructure, we were able to just export those systems directly from VMware. So we've got a fairly detailed list at that point. A question from Ron Guida, who asks if Logicworks augments or replaces AWS support services. So AWS does ask that its partner service groups make sure to sort of mediate access to AWS support, mostly because if we're providing managed service, oftentimes our help is required to implement a solution to particular issues. However, when you partner with a company like Logicworks, you are automatically enrolled in the enterprise support contract that we have with AWS. This enables us to get much quicker response times to most issues, and it saves you a lot of money because normally a enterprise support contract with AWS is 15 grand or 10% of your usage fees. And by partnering with us, we can provide that just as part of our service, sort of grandfathered across to any of the clients that we have. So you know, we do augment the service, and things do have to sort of go through us first, but we do our best to stay out of the way when necessary. If you just need to talk directly to somebody at AWS, that's one of the things that we can really provide because of our enterprise support. So as far as the cutover process, maybe this is something, Joe, you could comment on a little bit. You know, talking a bit about what the process was to cut over and whether it was rocky or smooth or how we went with that.
Sure, yeah. I can't actually add too much technical detail on the cutover process as I wasn't particularly hands-on on that. I do know that from a process perspective, it was handled by on-call resources from both sides working through any issues that came up. Again, we talked about this being more in line with the sort of quick and dirty migration rather than how we'd like it to go. So we certainly had resources on standby. Whether there were hiccups or not, I can't say, but I think the aim was to mitigate against the risk of that. So I can't provide more detail there, but sure, we're happy to follow up with the engineers that did it and give you some more detail.
Yeah, and in fact, we have a really great list of questions that are coming in, but I know we're definitely not going to be able to get to even a bit of them. So, you know, I think maybe this is a good place to stop. But then we're going to send out a sort of breakdown of all these sort of questions that we received and try to touch on these in our email afterwards. It's actually really exciting to get so many questions. So. You know, please look forward to that email, and we'll cover all these things that we weren't able to get to during this call. You know, I think we're probably that's probably good here. So yeah, Ty.
Yeah, thanks, Joe and Phil, for sharing this wonderful customer migration story. Thanks to all the attendees for taking time to attend this webinar today. This concludes our webinar. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.